Daniel Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Armed Forces Bowl matchup between the Baylor Bears and the Air Force Falcons. Two teams with very different dynamics heading into this matchup. You got Baylor, who finished out the regular season at 6-6, and it's no secret that this has been a bit of a disappointing season for Baylor, but they've got a chance to finish out the season on a high note as they take on Air Force, who's on a 4-game winning streak heading into this matchup. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with their team trends. Baylor lost to Texas 27-38 was the final score there. So a tough end to the regular season for Baylor, and this team lost each of their last 3 games in the regular season. They almost beat TCU, who is now in the college football playoff, lost to them by 1, and they got blown out to Kansas State the week before that. So yeah, it's been a bumpy finish to the season for Baylor, but 6-6. At least they're playing in a bowl game this season, but it obviously is a massive step down in comparison to last season when they won the Sugar Bowl and also won the Big 12. But I mean, that's just part of it, a rebuilding season. But at the same time, I mean, for Baylor, they lost some talent after last season, but I mean, the expectations were for real for the Bears heading into the season because of some of the experience that they were returning. But for Air Force, they beat San Diego State to finish out the regular season. 13-3 was the final score, so a low-scoring battle there. But the Falcons got it done. They're 9-3 on the season and also have a 4-game winning streak heading into this matchup. Games be on Thursday, December 22nd in Fort Worth, Texas. Your kickoff is 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going with Baylor by 5.5 here, which was a little surprising seeing that at first, especially in a game that should be more of a lower scoring one. I think Baylor's favored by a bit more than they should be. The FPI is going with Baylor as well, 69%. So the FPI is going even heavier on the Bears side here. Series history, Baylor leads at 3-0, and the last game was in 1977. Stat comparison for this one: Baylor, they're 40th in points per game, 69th in points allowed, 64th in passers a game, 35th in rush yards. So they got a strong backfield. Baylor does. Of course, the top rusher is Richard Reese, who's put up nearly 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. He's had a good season for this team, but the passing game it's been okay, but it hasn't been anything too notable. You got Blake Shapen, who maybe has disappointed a bit this season. I mean, coming off of Gary Bohannon, it seemed as if Blake Shapen could potentially be an improvement, but we really haven't seen a massive improvement in the quarterback position. Then for yards allowed, Baylor is 85th in passing, 44th in rushing, so got a halfway decent rush defense here, but the passing defense not as much. And as for Air Force, this team is very interesting statistically. They're 72nd in points per game, first in points allowed. They're the top team in the country in 3 of these areas. They're the top team in points allowed, they're the top team in rush yards a game, and they're the top team in the country in pass yards allowed. So this is a good football team in multiple areas, but they are dead last in pass yards a game, so there's that. I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting team here in Air Force, and that's kind of something that we see out of, the military teams. You got Air Force and you got Army and Navy. They don't pass the ball that much. They rush the ball, and they usually are very successful in doing so. Air Force has done exactly that. You got Brad Roberts, who's rushed for over 1,600 yards this season and 15 touchdowns. The starter at quarterback is Zeke Daniels, who's passed for 700 yards on the season, 6 touchdowns, 2 picks. So they really haven't even had a quarterback that's really passed. I mean, this Air Force team is averaging 331 rush yards a game. That's pretty incredible. I mean, even if you compare that to Baylor, who's 35th in the country in rush yards a game, Baylor's averaging 194 rush yards a game, and they're 35th in the country. You look up to number 1, which isn't that far away from 35th. Air Force is averaging significantly more at 330. So, and once again, they're dead last in pass yards a game. So really, Baylor's not going to have to worry about the passing defense too much. It's more or less worrying about Air Force rushing the ball on them. So at least defensively, I mean, the game plan should be a bit more simple for Baylor. It's just a matter of whether or not they can stop the run. But yeah, for Air Force, I mean, statistically on defense, this team is the top in the country as well, with only allowing 13 points a game. So you got a strong defensive team here in Air Force. This is, definitely a very intriguing matchup, especially if you look at it statistically. Recent matches: Baylor lost to Texas 27-38, lost to TCU 20-29. That's a game that they very well could have won. and they lost to Kansas State 3-31. That's a game that they deserved to lose. It was just a blowout from the start. That TCU game, I mean, it was just that last-second field goal, and that's what ended up winning it for TCU, and we saw that a lot of the Horned Frogs this season, and it's going to be interesting to see how they perform in the college football playoff. I mean, I'm trying to stay optimistic about TCU, but yeah, they've definitely caught a few breaks this season. But for Baylor, they also beat Oklahoma 30-35, solid win there on the road. Also beat Texas Tech 45-17. As for Air Force, they beat San Diego State 13-3, beat Colorado State 24-12, beat New Mexico 35-3, beat Army 13-7, lost to Boise State 14-19. You look at Air Force's losses; they've taken 3 losses on the season. All 3 of them were really close. They lost to Wyoming back in week 3 by 3. They lost to Utah State by 7, and then also that Boise State lost by 5. So this team, I mean, you flip a couple of those games, this team has been fairly dominant. If you just flip those close losses, this team could easily be a 10-2, 11-1, or maybe even a 12-0 team. I mean, they're not that far away from being an undefeated team this season with those close losses. So this is a solid Air Force team here, and I think some are underestimating the Falcons in this matchup. Key points: Baylor, a year ago, this team won the Sugar Bowl. They were probably the best team outside of the college football playoff at the end of the day. I mean, just the way that they came around at the end of the season was incredible. I mean, if I remember right, I mean, in 2021, this team, they weren't a big contender in the Big 12, but they really started to open some eyes in November, and that's really when we saw the Bears come alive, and they ended up winning the Big 12 and once again winning the Sugar Bowl. Bears have talent, but are just too inconsistent, and so you could say this has been a bit of a rebuild season for the Bears, and this is a chance to head into the offseason positively, looking forward to 2023, because clearly this just was not Baylor's year. It looked like it potentially could have, based on some of the talent that this team was returning and some of the experience that they were going to have, but in the end, it just wasn't. As for Air Force, the Falcons are a brutally strong defensive team, and also in the backfield, that's for sure. They can rush the ball, but they just cannot pass it. That can come back to bite for Air Force. If you can't pass the ball here and Baylor does a good job of containing the run, Baylor should be okay here. Air Force isn't going to be able to score very many points if they can't rush the ball. And they've won 5 of their last 6 and 3 straight bowl games. That's also something to keep in mind. This team has been hot down the stretch, and that's the polar opposite of Baylor, who's been cold down the stretch. And they've won 3 straight bowl games. They've had success recently in bowl games. So that's it. Let's get to the prediction here for Baylor and Air Force. The matchup coming up here in the Armed Forces Bowl, and I'll be going with Air Force here. 24-20 is my predicted final score. This would be considered a pretty decent upset here if it were to happen. And honestly, I definitely see this happening. I think Baylor is very much capable of winning this game, especially if they can stop the run. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to, and whether or not Baylor is even going to have the motivation. You got to consider that too. The Bears down the stretch, they've lost 3 straight. They won the Sugar Bowl last year, and we just saw what happened to Cincinnati just on Saturday when they played Louisville. This is just an example. They played in the college football playoff last year. They had a disappointing season this year, or at least it was down versus last year, and they just got blown out to Louisville in their bowl game. So potentially, you look at Baylor going up against Air Force, and this is not a very high-profile bowl game. I just don't know that Baylor is going to have that same energy that they need going up against a strong Air Force team. And in the end, I think Baylor keeps it close, but I like Air Force to win this one 24-20. I'll say 55% towards the Falcons. Over-under is 48.5. I'll take the under for this one, definitely, especially if you're going to take Air Force to win this. Take the under and Air Force to cover the spread in the end. So that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.